Thank you for tuning in. You're watching ArirangTV's special coverage of COVID-19. I'm Min San-hee. Health officials across the world are working to contain the virus as cases soar in many countries, including China and India. Korea, for its part, is now tackling not only domestic infections, but also those from abroad. We start the program now with the headlines for this Wednesday with our Kwon So-ah and Noaram. Welcome.
Hi.
So let's begin with the domestic updates as usual. I understand our cases have soared past 50 today.
Yes, unfortunately, we are back to the 50s, and that as we are having new local transmissions as well as imported cases, and those are putting authorities on high alert. And this Wednesday, these cases occurred in 11 cities or regions. Now, at this morning's regular briefing, Vice Health Minister Kim Gang-nip said there were 31 domestic infections and 20 from overseas. The latter have been rising steadily, although Kim noted imported cases have largely been limited to those detected in airport screening or during self-quarantine, meaning there's a low chance that those infections will lead to a further spread in the local community. Nevertheless, the government is having difficulties in lowering the rate of new infections compared to the speed in detecting them. Meanwhile, another COVID-19 case related to the Russia-flagged ship that docked in the southeastern port city of Busan early this week has been confirmed. Apart from the earlier 16 sailors that tested positive, the additional case was from another Russian boat nearby. This group infection prompted the government to enforce measures on ships arriving from Russia beginning this Wednesday. As electronic documents were found to have been falsely registered in this recent case that is, health authorities are to board ships and carry out inspections on symptoms and quarantine measures. So these local and imported cases combined resulted in 51 new cases, raising the total caseload to 12,535 in the country. And the death toll was unchanged from Tuesday at 281. It was the second time in the span of 7 days that the nation reported daily cases in the 50s. Above the 50s, it would have been 3 days in the past 7 days, and that is a surge from Monday's 17 cases.
And the government, meanwhile, has announced some quarantine guidelines for restaurants.
Yes, as chain transmissions continue to trouble the country, especially the metropolitan area, Korea CDC called on stronger measures for restaurants. Businesses are asked to improve seating arrangements, for instance, through the installation of partitions between tables and more seats for people dining alone. Also, they are asked to make it mandatory for visitors to wear their face masks except when they are eating, of course. Health authorities also called on thorough disinfection and ventilation and also encouraged more takeout and delivery services.
Right, so let's move on to the global updates and the most affected countries around the world. The US and Brazil are poised to conduct massive testing.
Yes, it's about time for Brazil because it has recorded almost 40,000 new cases in a day in the past 24 hours. So it may soon conduct its first large-scale testing for 50 million people, or roughly a quarter of the country's population, ever since its first outbreak in February and its first death in March. Brazil's interim health minister is pushing for this move in a country where the president has been downplaying the risks of the virus that has now killed more than 50,000 Brazilians. A public announcement on who will be tested is expected to be made this Wednesday. And the U.S. may also conduct more tests, as Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, claimed the federal government is aiming to expand testing and not reduce them, something that U.S. President Donald Trump has been mentioning recently. 7 states, meanwhile, on Tuesday have reported the highest number of COVID-19 hospitalizations since the outbreak first began. And that's evident in the numbers we're seeing here. The U.S. has more than 2.4 million total cases, followed by Brazil with way more than 1.1 million. And Russia is nearing 600,000, while India's cases are also on the fast surge. No big changes in the UK and Spain. The same goes for Italy. Here, as we can see, with Peru and Chile having much higher figures since weeks weeks now. Mexico, meanwhile, saw a record one-day high in new cases, now having the 12th biggest number of cases in the global arena. Now, in total, the world now has 9.35 million cases with a little over 5 million recoveries and almost 480,000 fatalities. And those are the global updates.
Right, so thank you for that. I'll see you again for the domestic updates after the briefing.
All right.
Global trade has been down amid the pandemic, but the WTO, that is, says it's not as bad as initially feared.
That's right. The WTO said it expects global trade to drop about 18.5% in the second quarter of 2020. Now, that does seem like a big number, but the WTO, however, did say the decline could have been much worse. Now, it said the expected plunge was better than the WTO's worst-case scenario for the pandemic's impact on global trade, and that the world economy may have bottomed out in the second quarter of the year. Now, in its annual trade forecast issued back in April, the WHO forecast that volumes would contract by between 13% at best and 32% at worst this year. Now, WTO economists say trade would only need to grow by 2.5% per quarter for the remainder of the year to meet the optimistic projection. However, looking ahead to 2021, next year, adverse developments including a possible second wave of COVID-19, weaker than expected economic growth, as well as widespread recourse to trade restrictions, could see trade expansion fall short of earlier projections. Now, the key, the WTO says, is to not get complacent, especially with travel and other restrictions increasingly being lifted at the moment.
Right. Now, many countries are seeing a rebound in cases, and this time the WHO says this is not because there's more testing.
That's right. The WHO's top emergencies expert, Mike Ryan, said that the figures are increasing as the pandemic is developing in a number of populous countries at the same time, namely the US and Brazil. Now, he said he doesn't believe it's what's he called a testing phenomenon. So he noted that the number of hospital admissions are rising along with the number of deaths. Now, in recent weeks, some state and federal leaders in the US have downplayed the recent rise in cases and hospitalizations across the country, tying it to an increase in testing. Ryan also said the pandemic is now moving towards a peak in a number of large countries, such as the US, and in regions including South Asia, the Middle East and Africa. Now, in regards to the second most infected country, Brazil, Ryan said the actual number of cases could be much higher than the official tally because there is a relatively low test per population rate in Brazil.
Let's turn to China now, where cases stemming from a wholesale market appear to be slowing down, but it's still causing much concern.
That's right. So China reported 12 cases nationwide on Wednesday. That's down from 22 the day before. Now, Beijing, the capital city, reported 7 cases, down from 13, and no new deaths were reported as well. But most of the cases have been linked to this Xinfadi food market, which reported its first case a couple of weeks ago, if we remember. Since then, nearly 250 people have been infected in the capital. Now, although there has been a decline, authorities are implementing strict measures to stop further spread. And a Beijing health official said the capital's mass COVID-19 testing will soon enter what he called a fast track. Now, residents in 5 high-risk and 39 medium-risk neighborhoods have been told to take tests. People can leave and enter medium-risk neighborhoods, but apartment blocks with 2 confirmed cases or more will be locked down. In high-risk neighborhoods, an entire residential compound will be locked down even if there is more than 1 infection. Beijing has also been expanding its testing regime to other parts of the city amid the concerns that the virus may have spread to other areas.
All right, Aram, thank you for that. We'll see you again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Up next, we bring you the regular government briefing on COVID-19 here in the country. Testing, tracing and treating continue as health authorities work to contain the surge in cases in Korea. Now, as acknowledged by the head of the KCDC, Chung Eun-kyung, earlier this week, Korea appears to be witnessing a second wave in progress, that is, as the number of critically ill patients and those in their 50s and above is slowly but tangibly on the rise. In response to this reality, the government is devising a detailed framework of quarantine guidelines for the public to ensure a stricter adherence to safety practices and to keep the virus at bay as the pandemic looks to become a prolonged affair, as initially feared by medical experts worldwide. The briefing is about to start. We'll come back to you afterwards.
Let us now begin our regular briefing on the COVID-19 response here in South Korea. As of June 24th, today, we have 31 new local infections and 20 imported cases. Adding up to the confirmed cases, and the total number now stands at 12,535. 22 more people have discharged from the hospitals after full recovery, and 1,334 people remain in quarantine undergoing treatment. We have no additional fatality as of yesterday. Here are some of the updates on the major domestic infections. At the Ridgeway in Gwanakgu district in Seoul, we have 3 additional cases being confirmed, and these new cases have been under self-quarantine, and of 205 people have been confirmed to date. And Seongsim Daycare Center also saw additional cases, with the total now standing at 47. And in Seoul's Yeongdeungpo district, we also had a meeting, small group meeting on automobiles, and we have 5 additional cases there. We're conducting epidemiological investigations there. And at a door-to-door sales in Seogu district, Daejeon City, we have 1 additional case. In total, 58 cases have been confirmed to date. 31 are visitors, 27 are contacts. Most of the visitors to the business establishment come from diverse other groups, including healing, nature, home doctor, which are also small groups of door-to-door sales business establishments. Yesterday, we had 20 new imported cases from overseas, 1 from America, 1 from Europe, 1 from America, 1 from China, and 16 from other parts of Asia, 4 from Iraq, 4 from India, and 4 from Pakistan. Yesterday, we identified the confirmed cases of a Russia flagship that had docked on the Busan port at Busan. And we also have a total of 17 Russian sailors, and we are conducting the testings for about 175 contacts, and so far we don't have any more additional cases. The KSDC, we are also staying on alert to curb the virus from spreading through these ports, and we will be continuing to intensify our measures of quarantine for ports. And as for all of the ships from Russia and other parts of high-risk countries, we will also check them of the symptoms. We also have put in place tougher quarantine measures, and while they're docking and unloading. And as for the boats and vessels with high risk of infection, we will carry out diagnostic testings as well. And as for all of the boats that are coming into the ports, we will also have them to mandatorily register via digitally. And we also will have a non-contact quarantine measures in terms of unloading as well. And we will also enable them to wear face masks at all times. And we are also analyzing our data, and we have also have new data on the clinical trials of the human patients, and we are also having revamped guidelines for the COVID-19 treatment, and these will be distributed from tomorrow. We have 2 major changes. First is the issues regarding the easing of the criteria for discharging confirmed patients. We believe that this PCR is a very effective tool when we confirm a positive case. However, even after full recovery and even after recovery for a certain period of time, PCR tests still test positive. Therefore, we still have many people remaining in the hospitals, even though they have been recovered. So we will have 2 different criteria to analyze the discharging of of the confirmed cases. As for people with no symptoms, we will consider that if they are over 10 days after the confirmed case, after the confirmation, and if they have no further symptoms after that, we will have them to be discharged from the hospitals, and we will also conduct PCR testings. And if they are tested twice, 2 times in a straight row for negative, we will also have them discharged from the hospitals. And we also will see the symptoms of fever so that they do not have fever within 72 hours with no anti-fever drugs. And if they have a continuous low temperature, we will have them to be discharged as well. And also when they have improvement of the clinical symptoms, we will also have them discharged from the hospitals as well. These will be determined by the medical practitioners, and we will have 2 different criteria in order to have these people discharged from the hospital. And second is the criteria for hospitalization. In order to secure a sufficient amount of hospital beds, we will also conduct close exchange of information between hospitals and life treatment centers, and we have had such procedures in the past. However, we provided some more detailed protocols, and if they do not have symptoms within 24 hours and show improvement of symptoms, we will have them to switch to other rooms within the hospital or be transmitted to the life treatment centers. And we will have the doctors to also issue a new hospital and medical document so that they could be transmitted back to the life treatment center. And if this is objected by the patient, up until now, we have had the medical costs be taken care of by the national budget. However, the patient would now have to take care of that budget. And we also witness continued cluster infections at door-to-door sales business establishments, especially centering around massive PR events. So we also encourage all of these facilities to refrain from gatherings at the large-scale PR events and training events, so that we do not have many elderly people in enclosed and poor ventilated spaces for a long time. And as for these door-to-door sales businesses, we ask you to continue to refrain from holding such events. Globally, we are seeing continued outbreak of the COVID-19, and we are also at a very critical moment to curb the local transmissions as well as the imported cases. In order to curb the imported cases, starting from early April, we have mandated all of the foreign entrants to be under mandatory 2 weeks of self-quarantine. And we do not have, therefore, additional spread of these virus cases to the local community. However, we did not have identified any large-scale imported cases at ports. However, we still have high risks of the virus, just like we saw at the Russia flagged ship recently. So we will be intensifying our quarantine measures there. And we also witnessed in the Chungcheong area that there were many small-scale meetings, especially centering around the door-to-door sales business establishments, and they engaged people at middle to senior elderly groups of people. So we continue to ask these businesses to refrain from attracting these senior citizens to come to their massive gatherings. And please note that if you are in the elderly group, to not visit these places going forward. And as for the family members that reside together with these elderly citizens, please take good care of the family members, and you yourselves should also refrain from visiting these places.
기자님들 질의응답 시간 갖도록 하겠습니다. 역학조사가 진행 중.
Right, that was Chong Kyung, the head of KCDC, with Wednesday's afternoon briefing. So, do give us a summary of the key announcements.
All right, let's start with the cluster infections here in the nation. We have more new cases related to door-to-door businesses as well as daycare centers. I'm just going to mention some of the major ones we talked about before. One related to Ridgeway, a door-to-door business in Seoul, has 3 additional cases, bringing the total to 205. And another door-to-door business in the city of Daejeon has 1 more case, raising the total to 58. And then we had those imported cases today, 20 in fact, and those came from Chung Eun-kyung, the KCDC chief, mentioned 8 countries and continents, so really from a variety of places around the world. And there has also been more updates on the Russian boat. As I mentioned before, 1 additional case was confirmed from a nearby boat that was docking in that area, so we have 17 cases related to that case, and the government is going to conduct stronger inspections, and also it includes entry bans and fees in the case some on the boat do not give reports of crew members with symptoms. So that's a new thing she mentioned. And also people are to wear masks even during loading and unloading of ships. And Chung also mentioned that there has been a revision or maybe an easing to the designation of people who are out of quarantine. For instance, people who had no symptoms, if they show no symptoms 10 days after being confirmed with the virus, they can get out of quarantine. So not 14 days, but 10 days. So that was a new measure the government announced.
All right, so thank you for that. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
And as health officials work to ensure public safety, their diplomatic counterparts are seeking to ensure regional security amid North Korea's provocations, which have taken a different turn on this Wednesday. For some insight into the latest events here on the peninsula and on the possible measures that South Korea and the US could take to further ease tensions in the region, I have David Maxwell, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, live on the line. Welcome to the program, Mr. Maxwell.
Hello, good afternoon.
Now, according to the latest media reports out of the reclusive regime, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has called for the suspension of military plans against South Korea, while troops of North have reportedly dismantled some of the propaganda loudspeakers that were recently reinstalled. What do you make of these new developments here on the Korean peninsula?
Yeah, it's very interesting after, a week of Kim Yo-jong's statements, with anti-South rhetoric that, and criticism of the leaflets from South Korea. And then, of course, the destruction or partial destruction of the liaison office. We had heard that they were going to reoccupy guard posts in the DMZ, occupy Kaesong and Kumgangsan, and of course, restart the loudspeakers. And as you reported, it looks like they've already been taken down. So I think what we've seen is that while we think maybe Kim Yo-jong has been given some power, I think, in fact, she did nothing that did not have Kim Jong-un's approval. And now Kim Jong-un is walking back her statements and the actions. And I think this is most likely because the South Korea and U.S. Really has responded with some strength, demonstrating, reinforcing the DMZ with tanks and infantry, South Korean forces, deployment of strategic assets from the United States, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance flights to really keep an eye on North Korea. I think what we really see is that Kim Jong-un is smart enough to know that he should never do anything when the alliance is strong, and we've had a demonstration of alliance strength recently.
And speaking of Kim Jong-un, should we be placing attention on the reality that this is the first time in months for the North Korean leader to directly address cross-border affairs?
Yes, I think that's interesting, but it was so interesting that he gave these orders by video teleconference. And so that begs the question of where is he located? Is he hiding from potential exposure to the coronavirus? How is his health? So I think that, I think it's unusual that he gave orders by video teleconference. And I think it's unusual that they told us that. Maybe they're trying to give the appearance that he's a modern leader. but I think it is open to a lot of questions. And I think you're right. This is the first he's really addressed North-South ties in recent months.
Mr. Maxwell, do you suppose his involvement now could serve as an opportunity to ease regional tensions?
Well, I would hope so, but I'm not optimistic. I think he's playing his, what we call his long con. I think we're going to see the frog boil between now and the November elections. We should keep in mind that Kim Jong-un has been a failure. He has failed to con or to play President Moon and President Trump. He wants only one thing, and that is sanctions relief, while keeping his nuclear and missile programs. And so, despite all the criticism of President Moon and President Trump, the one important thing they have done is not to give in to the demands to relieve sanctions. And I think everything that we see North Korea do is really designed to try to use its blackmail diplomacy to raise tensions and even conduct violent provocations to gain political and economic concessions, the most important being sanctions relief. And he has been unable to obtain that.
And speaking of President Trump, Mr. Maxwell, what appears to be the Trump administration's stance on the current situation between the two Koreas?
Well, I think we see the strong military alliance. We see increase in readiness. We see discussions between the two militaries about restarting military exercises or expanding them, which is very necessary. We need to maintain the readiness of South Korean and U.S. forces. But I think President Trump, like Kim Jong-un, has been avoiding any direct statements. I think in the end, he wants to continue to practice his unconventional, experimental, top-down pen pal diplomacy. And so I think he wants to be able to protect that relationship he has with Kim Jong-un. And of course, he claims a foreign policy success because Kim Jong-un has kept his promise not to test nuclear weapons or test an ICBM. And that is the one success that President Trump continues to tout.
One final question. What are your prospects on cross-border ties, and what efforts should South Korea and the U.S. make to ease tensions further on the peninsula?
Well, I think that South Korea and the United States need to demonstrate strength and resolve in the alliance. I think that Kim Jong-un is looking at the friction, the stalemate in the SMA, the different views of the two administrations, and we should keep in mind that a major objective of the Kim family regime is to divide the ROK-U.S. alliance. Ultimately, they want to get U.S. forces off the Korean peninsula, and he probably sees some hope. So the alliance needs to be strengthened. I also think that South Korea, and President Moon in particular, needs to reassess his assumptions. He assumed that his peace strategy would be met in the same manner from Kim Jong-un, and that Kim Jong-un, like President Moon, would want peace on the peninsula. I don't think that's true, and I think that it is time for South Korea and the United States to look at a plan B for how to address the recalcitrant North Korean regime.
All right, Mr. Maxwell, thank you very much for making the time to share your thoughts with us live at this hour from the U.S.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, over in India, health authorities are struggling to contain COVID-19 as the country looks to overtake Russia as the third most affected in terms of confirmed cases. Now, despite this dire situation, the government there has ruled out the possibility of a new nationwide lockdown. I have Ankita Manik, a journalist in India, live on the line with details on that. Ankita, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Right, Ankita. India is witnessing a surge in cases in the city of Mumbai following the lifting of its lockdown in late May. Please tell us a bit about the situation there.
So the cases have risen till 15 June, but now that we have hit our peak, the cases are going down. So the possibility, it doesn't make sense to go into a lockdown again because there will be like a lot of economic repercussions also that the government is concerned about.
Ankita, there are reports that hospitals in Mumbai and New Delhi are overflowing with patients and that some patients have even died in parking lots outside of these hospitals. Is this true?
That is partly true. That sometimes, we are very overwhelmed at the moment. But what's happening is that even the private hospitals in Bombay, for example, 80% of private beds are now going to be allocated for like COVID situations, so that this doesn't happen. And this measure was taken in May. So after that, I think there's been quite a relief. We have a problem with critical care beds, not with patients who are like moderate or mildly asymptomatic.
I see.
That's been the case with most countries, I guess. But now what we are seeing is that even critically care patients are doing okay, and the the death rate is dropping. We already have like a 2.6% death rate, which is lower than the international average.
Yes, it is. Ankita, I understand the Korean businesses in India, including Samsung, LG, and Hyundai Motors, as well as Korean nationals residing there, are partaking in efforts to ease the plight of the people in India amid the pandemic. What is the public response to these efforts?
Any effort taken by an organization is appreciated, but right now we do have like a concentration on how we want things to be made in India. So there's like a dual response because of that. I mean, there is like a response from people who want only goods to be made in India and who do not want foreign countries to even help out. But then there is, of course, like a positive response when it comes to like any sort of help that's been provided.
Ankita, earlier on June 19th, 150 Korean businessmen were granted entry into India via visa waiver on travel restrictions. What do you believe was the background for this exception by the Indian government?
Business, because our economic, we have had like a complete lockdown, and the economy has been in a crunch. I think it's important for like what the government is trying to do now is to get the economy back on track. So that's the whole and soul of this restriction.
All right, Ankita, thank you for joining us live with your thoughts at this hour.
Thank you.
디지털 뉴딜과 그린 뉴딜을 두 축으로 나란히 세운 한국판 뉴딜을 국가의 미래를 걸고 강력히 추진해 나갈 것입니다. 우리가 하고자 하는 디지털 뉴딜은 앞으로 디지털 경제의 기반이 되는 데이터 활용을 최대한 활성화하기 위한 이른바 데이터 댐을 만드는 것입니다.
As part of efforts to shore up its economy, Korea has launched its version of the New Deal with the aim of fostering a digital New Deal and a Green New Deal. For more on these efforts, I have Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. Good to see you again, Professor Song.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I also have Chang Da-ul, an advocacy specialist from the Greenpeace East Asia Seoul office. Welcome, Mr. Chang.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Song, we'll begin with you. The term Digital New Deal, it's one of the two pillars of the New Deal initiative to prepare Korea for a post-pandemic future. Could we begin with the definition of the term Digital New Deal?
Yeah, Digital New Deal is, the purpose is to initiate to create a foundation on which the upcoming digital economy thrives. So I believe the government and the people anticipate we can take some pioneering position as a pace setter in the recovery of the economy in the wake of the outbreak of pandemic. But however, the outbreak of pandemic and COVID-19 just accentuate the need of this kind of reform and reorganization and recovery, but only it expedites the process. That will it will take more than, for example, 5 or 10 years, but now we in need of immediate step to recover the economy and to start the reorganization of the all phase of the industry and the economy. I think that is one of the pillars to achieve that goal is a digital New Deal.
I see. And going over to the Green New Deal, Mr. Chang, could you tell us a bit about what that means?
Well, the definition of a Green New Deal could be diverse, but generally it means that it's a set of policy initiatives to address the global climate crisis, at the same time to boost up the economy and also improve the socioeconomic inequalities. That's how it's called Green New Deal. And for example, like in Europe, they call it as a European Green Deal, not Green New Deal, but European Green Deal. And Europe as a whole continent is aiming to achieve the carbon neutral by 2050 with the Green Deal initiative. So it has gotten more attention after Corona, because when a lot of countries are talking about the economic stimulus after post-Corona era, Green New Deal has gained much attention because it can address not only the economic crisis, but also the already existing global climate crisis.
I see. Professor Song, why is there so much emphasis, meanwhile, on the digital New Deal?
Yeah, as I explained a little bit earlier, because the upcoming digital economy and the digitalization of all the social transactions and economic transactions necessarily eliminate the old jobs. Therefore, it could have a very serious threat against some traditional jobs. So necessarily, it could increase the unemployment rate. So that's why Digital New Deal, of course, is to prepare for the future. But however, then we have to consider some side effect and byproduct of the Digital New Deal. So that's why the Digital New Deal and the Green New Deal encompasses some inclusive growth issue, and the government and the president emphasized the point of the social security and then preparation for the unemployed people. That is a necessary step to support or to maintain the digitalization of the new economy.
And meanwhile, turning to the Green New Deal, Mr. Chang, what importance does that deal have on a post-pandemic economic landscape, would you say?
With the Green New Deal, not only we can address the already ongoing global climate crisis, but also we need to boost up the economy, create jobs, and change the industry structure from the fossil fuel-based civilization to a carbon-free civilization. And that's a huge task. It takes a lot of years, and it takes a lot of public funding and private funding as well. But by doing the Green New Deal as a new growth strategy, we can create better jobs, and we can reduce the pollutions, and also the dire global climate crisis could be mitigated without too much interfering the sustainable growth of the economy. So that's why it is important for post-pandemic and post-Corona era.
And these efforts, of course, are being adopted by Korea's global partners as well. You talked about the European Green Deal. Could you tell us a bit about that as well?
Well, the global Green New Deal was being discussed first in the US when the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez proposed the Green New Deal bill to the US Congress, but so far it has been only being discussed at the National Assembly. But Green New Deal is becoming one of the major issues for the presidential election in the US as well. But European Union is the only continent or the countries which have taken serious steps for the Green New Deal. And as I said, they announced the European Green Deal December last year, and they mobilized the private and public funding close to the 1 trillion euros. And also, they have come up with a number of sectoral strategies from the beginning of this year up to now. And European Union is also preparing to pass a bill called European Climate Law to back up this Green Deal program. And recently, when Europe announced the huge economic stimulus for post-COVID-19 era, they made a clear point that European Green Deal is the center of the post-corona economic stimulus as well. So Europe has not changed any direction after Corona because they have already started the European Green Deal before Corona situation. But even after Corona situation, European Green Deal got more attention from the European countries. They're going to invest a lot of money to change the structure of the industry, structure of the energy system, transport, and buildings. And it will be a huge transformation. And as you said, South Korea is one of the trade partners of the Europe, and also we are one of the most export-oriented countries. So we cannot ignore this global trend of the global Green New Deal. Even European Union is considering to introduce a carbon border tax. So if we don't change our industry, even our export will get huge damage by not following this global trend.
Right. Professor Song, meanwhile, the government here has set AI and data science as the key components of its digital New Deal. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Oh, yeah. Artificial intelligence and the data and network is combining those parts and to develop some ecosystem that is supported by the digital network. And the other one is this kind of digitalization always include some elimination of the existing jobs, and also preparation and the training education only it takes very long, and it's going to be very difficult for the old age, older than 50s or 60s. It is almost impossible to learn. Therefore, necessarily we should focus on some creation of new jobs and then supporting some people who lost jobs. So another part is some non-contact industry also should be focused. So, and then the social overhead capital and infrastructure should be digitalized. So Digital New Deal is actually the preparation for the upcoming new economy. But in the meantime, we have to, in order to achieve that, what kind of infrastructure and what kind of social capital overhead and what kind of industry we should focus. That is the idea of the Digital New Deal. And but however, while pursuing that, we need to not only the government to be prepared, but also the private firms should internalize those factors. Otherwise, all the burdens are delivered to the government, and then the private firms just enjoy the outcome of the digitalization. That is going to be unfair. Therefore, the firms and the private firms, when they take advantage of the digitalization of the new economy and the social infrastructure, then they have to take into account the other parts of all the positive or negative externalities within the economy. So then we can have some very fair distributed burden among the entities within the economy.
So it needs to be a more comprehensive effort then from
right,
all parts.
Yeah.
And speaking of efforts, Mr. Chang, what should be done to ensure that the Green New Deal becomes a reality here in Korea post-COVID-19?
Well, first of all, the government has not disclosed the whole picture of the Korean New Deal, including the Green New Deal. They're going to disclose the whole comprehensive plan in July. So it's a bit early to analyze the plan, but we think in order to make a true Green New Deal plan, first of all, the government need to raise their ambition high. I mean, Green New Deal mainly aims to global climate crisis. That means that we know the inconvenient truth that unless we reduce our carbon emission by 50% until 2030 and up to net zero emission by 2050, there is no way that we can avoid of the catastrophic disaster said by UN Secretary General. It's not an overstatement, it's not an exaggeration. It has been repeatedly said that unless we reduce the carbon emission dramatically, we will face the catastrophic disaster. That means in order to address the global climate crisis, the government needs to come up with a high ambition to meet the 1.5 degree goal by 2050. And also they need to scale up the Green New Deal. Right now it's 13 trillion won of the plan until 2022. That's too small to be considered as a Green New Deal compared to that of the US or that of in Europe. So government needs to scale up. And finally, they should not conclude the Green New Deal plan by July. It should be continuous improvement. So we can expand the discussion with the different stakeholders, and government need to continuously improve the plan. They should not conclude by July. That's our suggestion.
And they need to make ambitious goals then.
Yeah.
I see. Well, we are running out of time, which is why we'll have to leave the discussion at that. Mr. Jang, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Song, as always, thank you for being with us today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And on that note, like I said, we say goodbye for today. Do join us again tomorrow at this hour as we commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Korean War amid the pandemic and trace the road that the two Koreas have walked since then. In the meantime, Ari랑TV welcomes your thoughts and inquiries through our social media accounts or homepage arirang.com. Thank you for being with us.